I mean, there's a difference, isn't there, between being a consumer and a producer of entertainment, and of course, being a consumer is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I mean, I write my books, I produce my books in the hopes that children are going to sit down and consume them. So, being a consumer of entertainment is a great way to spend your time. I love reading books. I love sitting down and losing myself in a fascinating book. Is it the same for computer games? Well, computer games automatically make us think that they're sort of problematic and that they're numbing children's minds rather than enriching them in some way. And whether or not that's completely true, I don't know. I think I think they are more passive than reading a book. You know, if you're just sitting in front of the television or if you're just sitting in front of a computer game, yeah, there's a passive element to that is perhaps less important with books. Books are physically passive, but you're creating the world in your mind, aren't you? When you're reading a story, you're bringing that world to life in your mind, and your imagination has to step up and do the work. Whereas if you're watching television or playing a video game, your imagination can sit back because they've already done that for you on the screen. So I think that definitely has to be taken into account. I'm still somebody who can lose themselves for hours and hours and hours at a time in a video game. I'm very picky and choosy. There's like one game even now that I will ever bother to play, but I like them so much that I'm prepared to spend huge amounts of money on an unnecessarily powerful computer, so that I can just do that every once in a while. I haven't played any games for months and months and months, but there will come a time when I'll start getting withdrawal symptoms and I will lose myself in them for every night a week for a couple of weeks or something like that, you know. So they do have a way of sucking you in, and you're not using your imagination. But there is also a flip side to that. So I'm not answering your question here, really. I'm just sort of debating it myself. Yeah. I hope that's okay. The flip side to it is that the creatives who have put this computer game together have spent a lot of time creating characters, creating beautiful scenes, creating very often incredible thought-provoking stories. Now, you can play the computer games without engaging with those stories, without noticing the characters. But if you are somebody who does pay attention to those things, then you are having some of the experiences that you would have if you read a book. So perhaps I'm not going to offer you any advice. I don't have kids of my own, so I'm not in a position to preach or advise about this at all, other than I think it's probably worth saying that different children will react differently. When I grew up with computer games, but when I was a child, the games were very different from the games that we see today. I don't know if you remember Elite, which was one of the earliest space simulations. It was one of the first 3D games, but it was wireframe, just white lines on a black background with some white dots whizzing by as stars, but it was a properly 3D environment, and it was magnificent. It was a sort of forerunner of the modern sandbox games, because you could pick and choose what you wanted to do. You could go to whichever planet you wanted to go to. Everything looked the same. All the planets and space stations looked the same. But so you had to use your imagination. You had to imagine those wireframe spaceships, would be. Okay. Your imagination had to add some of the detail in a way that modern computer games don't require children to do. But still, they might be engaging with it on more of a cognitive level than you realize. They might be having more of an imaginative experience and more of an enriching experience than you realize, even if they look as though they've turned into zombies. But I don't know. It's an unresolvable question. I mean, can you say that video games are bad and reading is good? I don't know.
Yeah, that's debatable, isn't it?
I think it is. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a good answer, because we don't know fully yet, and I think we just have to see the proof of it, I suppose. Will our generation, will this generation be worse than the previous? I don't know, but maybe that's a wrong way to judge it. Even then. But let's get on to the last.
Well, can I just add something into that? What you've just said then about about the next generation compared to this generation. I mean, so ever since technology from the earliest days of television, in fact, from the earliest days of cinema, people have been predicting a sort of a meltdown in the creativity and the cognition of children. People, when video games came out, of course, people said the video games are bad for children's imagination because they're so passive. But prior to that, it was a television. Everybody has said in previous generations, children who watch too much television, it'll numb their minds and this kind of stuff. And believe it or not, this was said right back through history when books and novels started to become available. I wouldn't be able to confidently pin that down to a decade, but it's probably somewhere in the 1700s, something like that. And believe it or not, there were people who thought that novels were going to fry our children's minds, and it hasn't happened. Centuries and decades have sailed by, and our children have always blossomed. Each generation after the next after the previous one rather, has blossomed into a generation that is producing more and more fantastic things. So creativity might be under attack, but it's not going
It's
down
probably
without
not
a fight. It just still seems to survive. It's like people who said that when we were able to travel at 35 miles per hour on a train, people thought you wouldn't be able to breathe traveling at that speed. Transport's gone way beyond that now, and it's blossoming. I think that the generation that's in school at the moment, whatever education is like for them, whatever video games they've got access to, the generation en masse, not necessarily individuals, but en masse, are going to amaze us with the things that they're able to create in future years.